Jonathan Carrillo was born around 1982 in Quito, Ecuador. Although his exact birth date is unknown, we know that he was the son of Edith Sanchez and Patricio Carrillo. Their family comprised 3 children, Israel, Alex, and Michelle. Patricio served as the main pastor of Oasis de Esperanza, a Pentecostal evangelical Christian church that operated in various countries, including Colombia, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica. In Quito, the headquarters was located in a 2-story house in the La Biloxi neighborhood, south of the capital. In the same area, a few years later, Elizabeth Rodriguez and her husband, Absalon Campovelde, were expecting their first daughter. For Elizabeth, the news of her pregnancy felt like the greatest blessing God could give her. It was 1993, and for months, the couple wondered what to name the baby girl who would soon be born. Absalon liked the name Michelle Elizabeth. However, Elizabeth disliked the idea of her daughter having the same name as hers, so they opted for Juliana Lisbeth. Thus, on August 21, 1993, they welcomed Juliana. As soon as she saw her, Elizabeth realized how much her life had changed for the better. But the happiness didn't stop there, because shortly after, the couple welcomed their second child, Ronnie. This time, the greatest joy was Juliana's, who found in her little brother the perfect playmate. She would dress him up in her dresses, accessories and shoes, and when her mother asked why, Juliana would respond that this way, she had her own doll. Cheerful and smiling from a very young age, Juliana showed a passion for music. It was amusing to see her sing, and surprising how quickly she memorized most of the songs she heard. When she entered kindergarten, she participated in a contest, and won. On that occasion, one of the questions the teacher asked her was what she wanted to be when she grew up. Juliana answered that she wanted to be a singer. In school, Juliana proved to be diligent. Her intelligence allowed her to grasp lessons quickly, and at home, she did her homework on her own. Elizabeth and Absalon did not hide the pride they felt for her excellent grades, and that satisfaction increased even more when Juliana was later named flag bearer. No one would have thought, seeing the harmonious home environment, that the couple would decide to separate, but that's what happened. By then Juliana was 9 years old. With a devastated heart, Absalon moved to Zamora, Chinchipe, in the south of the country. The separation was mutual, as Juliana missed him every day. Every time her father called on the phone, she overflowed with joy, and she made this known to her mother, constantly repeating that her father was everything. Meanwhile, at the evangelical church, Jonathan began training as a leader and spiritual counselor for the youth group, where he played the guitar and led the choir. Although Elizabeth did her best to move forward with her children, that personal schism became a steep hill to climb. Seeking spiritual help, she went with Juliana and Ronnie to the evangelical Christian church, Oasis de Esperanza. They started going every Wednesday at 7:30 p.m., and on Sundays to religious services, which began at 8 a.m. The boys and girls received Bible lessons in another room, and Juliana came out each time with a new verse learned. Noticing that other girls danced and played the tambourine, she asked her mother to buy her one so she could participate, and she eventually joined the church's dance group. Gradually, Elizabeth's grief began to subside. Her relationship with Juliana was also more than enough proof of how well she was doing in her role as a mother. They were everything to each other. Their long conversations often lasted late into the night. They went shopping together and enjoyed every shared activity. It was clear that they were united by complicity and trust. Another significant source of support at home was Margot, Elizabeth's sister, and Juliana's aunt. Mother's Day was usually an occasion where Juliana shone with Elizabeth. She would bring her a gift, whether it was roses or a letter, always accompanied by hugs and abundant affection. Regarding her paternal bond, Juliana and Ronnie traveled to Zamora, Chinchipe, during each year's school vacation. Upon returning, she would tell her mother that she and her father were a blessing from God, and that therefore she would always take care of them, especially when they were old. For her 15th birthday, instead of a party, Juliana asked for new clothes. After all, she was already a young lady. Despite adolescence being a difficult stage, Juliana did not show any signs of rebellion. Her academic performance was very satisfactory because she continued to be diligent in her studies. Additionally, she joined the praise choir on Thursday nights and attended the leadership course. Every Saturday, Juliana would fine-tune her beautiful voice during praise rehearsals to perform on Sunday during the service. Around the same time, Patricio considered that Jonathan should be his successor. So, through verbal and written requests, he asked the body of pastors of Quito, the organization that gathered all the evangelical pastors in the city, to ordain his son as a pastor. Thus, without requiring any other prerequisites, psychological evaluation, or prior studies, the president of the guild, Garlo Grandes, along with another pastor, conducted Jonathan's religious ordination as an evangelical pastor. In 2010, Jonathan proclaimed himself as being filled with the Holy Spirit, capable of having divine visions and interpreting God's will and biblical scriptures. Both he and the other pastors and attendees held great affection for Juliana, who was always sweet, tender, and kind to everyone. Meanwhile, she met a young man her age at school, Julio Vasco, with whom she soon began a relationship, always with Elizabeth's approval. Since Julio also belonged to the Oasis Church, he liked the idea of joining the choir, which would also allow him to share more time with Juliana. But when the pastors learned about the type of relationship Juliana and Julio had, for the first time, they called her attention and reminded her that she was still a minor. As for Jonathan, he kept a distant attitude toward Julio, and placed numerous obstacles in his way of joining the choir. Eventually the church decided that Juliana needed to be reprimanded. They then forced her to choose between the choir or her boyfriend. For her, singing praises to God was paramount, so she chose to leave her boyfriend. But for Juliana, it marked the beginning of a constant internal conflict, compounded by the pressure from the treatment she received at the church, which was very different from that of other young women. Seeing the situation and completely displeased, Julio left the church and distanced himself from her. Like the rest of the congregation, Elizabeth and Juliana had to tithe, giving the church 10% of all their income, but they also had to give offerings and first fruits. According to the Bible, these offerings are voluntary, based on the principle that the first and best should be for God. However, the church the family attended was much more focused on accumulating wealth. Thus, nothing was voluntary, but mandatory. As the pastors told them, the more money they gave, the more blessed they would be. This led Elizabeth to end up indebted to a bank. But the faith of both, especially Juliana's, was unwavering. Juliana's personal diary showed how her decisions had to first pass through the filter of the gospel. By extension, Juliana's obedience to the temple leaders was absolute. When she graduated from high school in 2011, her classmates chose her to give the farewell speech. By that time, she already had her life plan, which was to study music in Argentina. While she was processing the paperwork to travel and waiting for the academic cycle to start in that country, Elizabeth and Absalon arranged everything for Juliana to have her own business in the field of natural medicine, which was also her mother's line of work. They opened a small shop for her, which she attended to daily. One day, Juliana received a friend request on her Facebook account from someone named Juan Solano, a supposed psychologist and pastor. She accepted the request, not knowing that behind that fake profile was Jonathan, who by that time had stored a considerable number of photos of the young woman on his computer, along with a vast collection of adult sexual material. He was a complete deviant, and to make him even more dangerous, he wielded enormous power given to him by the faith of the churchgoers he manipulated. Between his time spent on ministry and his work in the systems unit of the National Meritocracy Institute, Jonathan began manipulating Juliana through biblical quotes, confusing her, and making her abandon the idea of traveling to Argentina. Jonathan, always pretending to be someone else, went further. He told her that God's plan for her was different and had been revealed to him. This divine plan, no less, was that Juliana should marry his brother, Israel. Her confusion was enormous. Fortunately, her trust in her mother was absolute, and she immediately told Elizabeth. Aware of the situation, the worried mother decided they needed to leave the church. Elizabeth said, "I was furious at that moment, seeing that Jonathan had said this to her, so I told her, 'Juliana, my daughter, for God's sake, not even I as a mother can or should find you a husband, much less them, as pastors or whatever they may be. But no, that's not right.' And she told me, 'Mom, I don't want to marry Jonathan's brother.' I said, 'No one should,' and she backed away. Anyway, the opportunity to go to Argentina was lost. Faced with her thwarted dream, Juliana continued running her business on Ivy and Sosaranga Avenue. Then, at Elizabeth's suggestion, the young woman focused on continuing her studies. This time she enrolled at the Catholic University to study biological sciences, and after taking the entrance exams, she was accepted. Meanwhile, Jonathan was searching the internet for ways to track and delete an IP address and how to hack Facebook accounts. On Saturday, July 7, 2012, Juliana woke up early. She said goodbye to her mother, and around 9 a.m., she was on her way to open her business. Since then, nothing more was known about her. According to investigators and the prosecutor's office, Jonathan kept her captive and took her life on a date, and in a manner that have not been disclosed. A report revealed her last location through a cell phone call made with Juliana's chip from Jonathan's phone. This occurred on the night of July 7th, when Elizabeth was already starting to despair from not hearing from her. At the first light of July 8, 2012, the heartbroken mother reported her disappearance. What happened in the following hours is uncertain. But based on the evidence presented by the prosecutor's office, the last contact between Juliana and Jonathan took place on July 9th at the institution where he worked. As part of the systems unit, Jonathan had access to security videos and the creation of users for the use of entry cards to the site. The forensic report concluded that there were alterations in the dates of the videos, as well as time changes in the system's database. All these fraudulent changes were made between July 7, 8 and 9, 2012. Jonathan had also made 2 access cards for himself. Meanwhile, Patricio, Israel, and Alex visited Pastor Galo at his house and told him about Juliana's disappearance. They also asked him to sign a document that would lift Jonathan's confessional seal, assuring him that it was essential for justice to act. On Monday, July 9th, Margot, Elizabeth's sister, answered the phone. On the other end of the line, Pastor Galo offered his support and prayers for Juliana's quick return, and then, in an unexpected gesture, mentioned that they would receive a response within minutes. And so it was. Shortly after, a message sent from Juliana's cell phone said she had gone to Cuenca, almost 500 kilometers south of the country. The story of the supposed trip was unbelievable because she would never have left in that manner. But it was the only clue, as the investigations that had begun were not advancing in the slightest. The truth was that no one knew anything more about Juliana, and no trace seemed to emerge from such a mystery. The lives of all family members changed. Each day became a struggle. Standing before his sister's empty room, Ronnie felt incapable of understanding. The situation was no less inconceivable for Elizabeth, who from one minute to the next found herself without her little girl, her companion, her first love. However, in her mother's heart, she harbored a suspicion and a certainty. The first told her that the church was involved. The second, that she would never rest in her fight to find Juliana. Indeed, armed with signs and tenacity, Elizabeth went to every possible instance. In that battle for answers, and to ensure the case was not forgotten, she was supported by Absalon. By 2014, Police Lieutenant Luis Romero was assigned to lead the investigation, but in the parents' opinion, the authorities' actions left much to be desired. For this reason, the family visited Pastor Gilo, seeking a statement from the body of pastors, but the only response they received from him was that they could do nothing but wait for justice to act. Those were hard years, certainly the worst in the lives of Elizabeth and Absalon. Meanwhile, although there were no results, the investigators kept probing. They focused on tracking Juliana's cell phone. Thus, in 2018, 6 years after the disappearance, the agents found binding evidence against Jonathan. The call log showed that he had removed the SIM card from Juliana's device. Based on this evidence, during the early morning of September 5 that year, Jonathan was arrested at his home and taken to give a statement at the flagrancy unit. The procedure also included searches of his home. During the nearly 4-hour interrogation, Jonathan denied being Juan, the supposed psychologist and pastor, who manipulated Juliana through Facebook. Generally, he kept silent. At the end of the interrogation, prosecutor Mayra Soria pressed charges against him for extortionate kidnapping and requested preventive detention. Expert Mauro Rodriguez was responsible for tracing the internet searches made from Jonathan's computer, thanks to a list provided by the National Telecommunications Corporation, CNT. Mauro also found extensive compromising material with images. On October 12, 2018, a sweep was conducted in the south of Quito, with personnel from the prosecutor's office, agents from the Special Operations Group, GOE, Metropolitan Police, the Order Maintenance Unit, UMO, Elizabeth, and her lawyers. Although the agents searched the ravines in the area and found clothes, shoes, and a book, none of these belonged to Juliana. The church was also searched, but without success. An unexpected turn of events finally occurred at the beginning of November, when Jonathan opted for effective cooperation, a legal option that would allow him to receive a reduced sentence in exchange for information about the investigated crime. In his version, Juliana died in his hands due to an accidental fall, and later, he threw her body into a ravine in Bella Vista. He also admitted using the fake profile of Juan, but claimed he did so only because she was going down the wrong path. For Lieutenant Luis, Jonathan's words were contradictory. With the presence of authorities and Juliana's family members, a reconstruction of the events was carried out, followed by several excavations in the ravine. The efforts resulted in the discovery of 4 bone fragments. The subsequent task of identification was undertaken by forensic anthropologist Miguel Angel Moreno, who determined that 2 of the pieces were a femoral head and a tooth, both corresponding to the body of an adult woman. Due to the wear, he established that they had been buried for between 6 and 8 years. The discovery triggered diverse emotions in Elizabeth, ranging from joy to pain. However, due to the climatic conditions in which they were found, it was impossible to extract DNA and definitively confirm that the remains belonged to Juliana. The justice system issued an arrest warrant against Patricio and his son, Israel, on December 28, 2018, for investigative purposes, but both left the country before giving statements. The entire situation led to an astonishing discovery. Investigations into the church revealed that it did not have approved legal status with the former Ministry of Justice, Human Rights and Worship, meaning that the entire time the Pentecostal Evangelical Church operated, it was outside the law. Moreover, the people leading the congregation lacked credentials and suitability for the role they exercised over so many souls. In total, the case passed through the hands of 10 prosecutors, causing deep frustration in Elizabeth because, despite significant advances, she continued to feel the bitter sense that things were not done correctly from the beginning. Once the evaluation and preparatory hearing concluded on May 2, 2019, Judge Yadira Proaño called Jonathan to trial as the author of the crime of extortionate kidnapping resulting in death. Until that moment, he remained in preventive detention in Latacunga prison. The prosecution presented 35 testimonies and 18 documents to establish responsibility. By then, Pastor Jonathan was no longer accompanied by his faithful followers. His only companions in the trial were 2 police officers. Throughout the process, he opted for silence. He remained seated with a lost gaze and a hunched back. Neither his face nor his gestures revealed anything. The psychological profile conducted by the prosecution described him as an egocentric, dominant person with immature sexual behavior, incapable of forming relationships or feeling empathy for others. During the initial session on July 2, 2019, the first witness called by the prosecution was Elizabeth. Jonathan did not look at her even for a second. Ramiro Garcia, Absalon's lawyer, argued in his opening statement that the case should be judged as a disappearance without a body, as contemplated by the jurisprudence of Germany, Spain and Brazil. He also requested the maximum sentence of 25 years in prison. According to Ramiro, if the case had occurred today, it would clearly be considered femicide due to the pressure and manipulation Juliana suffered at the hands of the church, and the violent manner of her death. The defense lawyers, on the other hand, only admitted to a simple kidnapping, arguing that the death could not be definitively proven. Later, expert Pilar Chiriboga, who analyzed Juliana's psychological profile, mentioned that her deep faith was used by Jonathan to manipulate her. In this regard, the conversations between the profile of Juan and Juliana were presented as key evidence. Various specialists testified about the results of their reports, and Jonathan's version was questioned by these expert analyses and testimonies, including that of Lieutenant Luis. In the hearing on Wednesday, July 3, forensic pathologist Luis Guaico simulated a fall similar to the one Juliana allegedly had in her last altercation with Jonathan. According to the forensic pathologist, this fall was simple and could only have caused injuries or bruises, but not the death of the young woman. In his final plea, lawyer Ramiro assured that the process showed the cruelty with which Jonathan acted by leaving Juliana's family without certainty of what happened to their daughter. Then came an endless wait filled with anxiety about receiving justice. The 3 judges who formed the Criminal Guarantees Tribunal, Sara Costales, Galo Rumiguano, and Daniel Tufino, took about 4 hours for deliberations. Impassive, Jonathan entered the room as his mother and brother Alex approached him and hugged him for a long time. Finally, Judge Sara spoke. She mentioned that unanimously, the tribunal decided that the case consisted of a kidnapping resulting in death. It was proven, she said, through multiple pieces of evidence, that Juliana had no reason to disappear, so she was the victim of a criminal act. The tribunal declared that they were convinced of Juliana's death, although it was not possible to extract DNA from the remains found. The evidence and testimonies presented by the prosecution were sufficient to prove Jonathan's responsibility. Thus, in the afternoon of July 17, 2019, Jonathan was sentenced to 25 years of special major confinement by Judge Sara. The Criminal Guarantees Tribunal of Pichincha also ordered the comprehensive and symbolic reparations requested by the prosecution, the definitive closure of the Oasis of Hope Church, training for the National Police and prosecution in gender-focused investigation, and the executive to create a national registry of pastors and evangelical leaders. Additionally, it ordered material compensation of $100,000 for Elizabeth and Absalom. The family burst into tears upon hearing the sentence, and then Elizabeth's desperate cry demanding Jonathan to return her daughter was heard. She, like the entire room, held out hope that he would confess the whole truth, but there was nothing, not a word. The psychological report did say that the subject lacked empathy, yet he was allowed to shepherd souls for many years. Elizabeth said, "We have achieved that the court sentences Jonathan Carrillo to 25 years because it was proven that he kidnapped my daughter or took her against her will, and the result of this is that he murdered her." In fact, despite the sentence and the evidence against him, Jonathan and his lawyers insisted on his innocence, so they appealed the sentence. A year later, on June 11, 2019, the tribunal expanded the points of comprehensive reparation of the first instance sentence, ordering the continued search for Juliana's remains in the Bella Vista ravine, and the establishment of a reward. Additionally, the Evangelical Church was to place a plaque in memory of the events. On June 11, 2020, the Provincial Court Tribunal of Pichincha rejected Jonathan's appeal and upheld the original sentence. On the morning of May 20, 2021, dressed in black and walking slowly, Elizabeth arrived at the Bella Vista ravine. Members of the Special Operations Group, the National Directorate of Crimes Against Life, Violent Deaths, Disappearances, Extortion, and Kidnappings, and 2 rescue dogs also arrived at the site. The instructions given to the groups were to descend while clearing the undergrowth. In case they found bones or any type of remains, they were to be handed over to a forensic anthropologist. The police groups avoided specifying how long the search would take. However, Elizabeth said that Juliana's case would not be closed until her remains were found, as that was a fundamental part of the family's comprehensive reparation. Nevertheless, Elizabeth later declared that they still did not know about Juliana. In her words, without her daughter's body, justice was only half achieved. On the 10th anniversary of her disappearance, on Thursday, July 7, 2022, her family and several social organizations held a demonstration to demand the implementation of comprehensive reparation measures. During the event, Elizabeth read an emotional letter to her daughter, highlighting the state's inaction throughout the process, and reaffirming her relentless fight, until all the responses to the petitions were fulfilled. The family suffered new pain and affront from those who claimed to act in God's name. The Quadrangular Church of Ecuador flatly refused to comply with the reparation measure regarding the commemorative plaque for Juliana, who was kidnapped and killed by one of its members. Elizabeth's search continued relentlessly. With living hope, she pursued even the memory of Juliana in the sounds of nature, in the rain, and even in the silences, as if she herself had been trapped in time, waiting for the return of that daughter who could not fulfill her dreams and goals. This is the story of the case Juliana. What do you think about the corrupt character of Jonathan, someone who was seen as a representative of God? Do you think his 25-year prison sentence is justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next case.